About Chapter 11, Section 3. And the big idea behind this is that political and economic institutions evolve to help individuals and groups accomplish their goals. So the idea of our republic is that our government should be responsive to its voters. But how does that work in practice? Some of the ideas that we'll be looking at today are public interest groups, political action committees. What does it truly mean to be nonpartisan, if that's even possible? And then, what is a lobbyist? So, we've already discussed that groups with great financial resources can exercise powerful influence, even sometimes pushing out the interest of those with fewer resources. But an interest group is an important part, nonetheless, of our political process because they, after all, influence policy. You see, an interest group is an organization of people who unite to promote their ideas. If there is something in this world you want to change, the reality is you won't be able to change it yourself. The comfort is there is probably an interest group working to promote that very change that you want to see. And so in a way, they play a vital role. There are various types of interest groups. We'll start with the economic ones. For example, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is an interest group devoted to protecting and promoting free enterprise. If you've ever heard of Big Tobacco, the Tobacco Institute represents all cigarette and tobacco manufacturers in our country. They are a very powerful lobby working to make sure that cigarettes remain legal and they remain available in stores for you to purchase. Another great example of this is the AFL-CIO. It stands for the American Federation of Labor and the Congress of Industrial Organizations. This is an economic interest group. In fact, it is the largest labor union in our country. And its goal is to promote the financial well-being and economic interest of its workers. Once more, the AFL-CIO. Another example of an economic interest group is the American Medical Association. This group represents doctors. They provide malpractice insurance. They release statements about new drugs. They authorize what the Federal Drug Administration has deemed safe for consumption. They are the authoritative definition on drugs and procedures in this country. And you can read their official statement on all manner of procedures and new drugs coming out. Other types of interest groups. The NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, is certainly an interest group. They were founded in 1909 by W.E.B. Du Bois, and their goal has been to promote civil rights for African Americans and to protect civil rights for African Americans. And they've been working ever since for that. There's the National Organization of Women. They represent women's interest. They have been working to not only help secure voting rights for women in our country, but to promote the financial well-being and to help women be protected from discrimination. There is the American Association of Retired Persons. It's the old people interest group. That is a thing. And they work for promoting the interest of the elderly. Or maybe if you're an outdoors person, the Sierra Club is an interest group devoted to protecting and conserving our nation's natural resources. And of course, the National Rifle Association is an interest group. And they have been working to protect Americans' gun ownership rights and have lately been fighting against the possible ban on assault weapons. So a public interest group. A public interest group is an organization that supports causes that affect the lives of Americans in general. For example, the League of Women Voters. They are a nonpartisan group. Nonpartisan means that they are free from party ties or bias, and their goal is to promote voter participation. There's a Henderson County League of Women Voters. They are an excellent resource in terms of voter education and increasing voter participation. I'll try to get them in here sometime to talk to you guys. There are also interest groups that support particular candidates. These are called political action committees. A political action committee is a political organization established by a corporation, a labor union, or another type of special interest group designed to support candidates by contributing money. So once again, political action committees are very powerful interest groups. They devote financial resources to particular candidates. Interest groups even bring cases to court. I have a friend who is a lawyer in Greenville. He's an environmental lawyer. And he recently challenged a case in court on behalf of American Whitewater, an environmental interest group. A local family in South Carolina was trying to tell people they could not legally float on a river that goes by their property. They tried to say off limits. Well, in North Carolina and South Carolina, there is a freedom of waterways law, meaning that if it is a navigable waterway, you can float down that river no matter what, even if private property is on either side. As long as you stay in the river, you can legally float down it. And so they had to demonstrate in front of a judge that the river could be safely navigated. And so they showed a video of the people going down the rapids. Case closed. It can be navigated safely. The person had no claim to tell these folks they could not go onto their property because it's not technically their property. It's a navigable waterway. And so that lawyer was paid for by American Whitewater, who I helped pay a very small part of their operating costs. So interest groups also attempt to influence lawmakers using lobbyists. And so I follow this one individual who is a lobbyist for an interest group called the Outdoor Alliance. Like the Sierra Club, this group works to promote access to America's beautiful places and also to protect those beautiful places from development. He is a lobbyist. A lobbyist is someone who is a representative of an interest group. It is that person's job to contact lawmakers or other government officials directly and to attempt to influence their policy-making decisions. So this person has a very good understanding of how the government functions. They also know which government department to contact. For example, Outdoor Alliance is in very close contact with the Department of the Interior. That is the executive level cabinet department whose job it is to protect our natural resources. And then finally, they supply lawmakers with useful information. One of the most recent fights between the Outdoor Alliance and the Department of the Interior has been over the federal protection of particular public lands in Utah, a particular place called the Bears Ear National Monument. And the Department of Interior, who is currently led by a cabinet level position whose last name is Zinke, Zinke wanted to declare those federally protected lands part of the state of Utah's public lands. So he wanted to turn them over from the federal government to the state. And then Utah had plans to drill and mine on those particular lands. So bottom line, if those lands are to remain protected, they must keep their federally protected status. And so this young man who's a lobbyist for Outdoor Alliance has gone and met with members of the Department of Interior on a regular basis. He's always in Washington trying to convince these people, however possible, to keep those lands federally protected. Because otherwise, they'll just be a big mine or a big something there. And that's what that person does for a living. And that's actually a rather lucrative career that you can go into if your passion is law or politics. And so they suggest solutions. Is there a better way to do this that doesn't have to result in the destruction of Bears Ear National Monument? And it's certainly a problem that a lot of people feel needs to be addressed. Groups like the Outdoor Alliance even have versions of their own laws they can try to suggest. The NRA has their own versions of laws to prevent threats to gun ownership. And obviously they don't have the power to pass these laws, but they suggest them. Hey, here's a new idea for this. We've already written it out. Have your lawyers check it. Lobbyists testify in legislative hearings on bills because the reality is that our lawmakers aren't fully aware of all matters, and so they are going to need experts' opinion. For example, in the case of the navigable waterway in South Carolina, I know roughly where they were talking about, and once I saw the video, I saw that it is obviously navigable. But the landowners were trying to claim that it was too dangerous to be navigable. And so they had to show a video of experienced paddlers safely navigating the rapids. Turns out it didn't kill them. They showed it in court of law. The judge had to conclude that it was, based on video evidence, a navigable waterway. And then finally, these very same groups see that these laws are enforced. Because occasionally people will try to break laws and someone needs to make the government aware that these laws are being broken. For example, let's say that in Balsam Grove, North Carolina, there is a fish hatchery. There is. And let's say that when it floods, the chemicals used in that hatchery are not properly contained, ergo floodwaters can mix those chemicals with the groundwater, making the groundwater even more dangerous than it already is, killing livestock, which has happened. I've seen people witness that, and I've seen them try to report that. The problem is, when my friend tried to report that incident, nothing got done. Because by themselves, they only represented one person. Even though the law was on the books that you're not supposed to store chemicals that way, because it was just one person going up against a business with a lot of resources and backing, they weren't able to get anything accomplished. And so instead, my friend contacted a local environmental interest group who is fighting that case on their behalf. And so interest groups obviously serve a purpose. Can serve a positive purpose, but can also, like you read in the previous article, cause some problems. Now, how do they pull this off? If we want to get that fish hatchery to clean up their act, how do we actually make that happen? That's the really tricky part, and that's where lots of money is spent. So interest groups use a couple of different tactics that are fairly obvious and some less so. For example, direct mail. You know, the first proper step is to send a notarized letter to the proper channel. The interest group is going to know who that is, how to write that letter, and how to get it sent. To use advertising. Maybe the public need to be made aware of this. You know, maybe the incident with the fish hatchery was only known to that one individual and only known to the judge that it was brought to. And had they left it be there, nothing's going to be done. And so maybe the public need to be aware of what's going on. Maybe there even needs to be a public event. You know, if the judge was acting unlawfully by siding with the fish hatchery, then the judge is in the wrong. And the public need to be made aware that our court system is not enforcing the laws appropriately. Now, interest groups use a variety of techniques to influence public opinion and policy. Perhaps the one that we recognize most often is the use of propaganda. We are exposed to propaganda in many different forms every day. And hopefully we are all educated enough to recognize when we are being exposed to propaganda and how to avoid being misled by biased information. Because after all, if the legal process does not work, if the judge is not going to change his mind through appropriate channels, the next step is for them to get the public riled up. You know, no president wanted to sign the 1964 Civil Rights Act, one of the most significant pieces of federal legislation in American history. No president wanted to touch it from the 1800s until 1964. But you know what happened? 1 million people showed up in front of the White House and said, sign this thing. And they represented many more millions of people. And guess what? The president signed it. I mean, the NAACP had been working for over 50 years at that point to get that law signed. And 50 years of going through every appropriate channel they could think of. And finally, they went to the American people. And it got done. And so there are positive forms of this, just like there are negative forms of this. Okay, so how do we regulate this? You know, as I've demonstrated, like the NAACP, interest groups have done some amazing things in this country. But they've also hindered the democratic process in other ways, like you saw in the video. And so most people agree that there need to be rules placed on these types of groups, like limits on what they can contribute, or even a requirement to disclose money given. Did you know that many lawmakers retire and become lobbyists? It's one of the most common things for lawmakers to retire and then become lobbyists. And they're perfect for the job because they already know the other lawmakers. They already have dirt on them and they have long-standing relationships. They're the perfect people to try to get to influence their former colleagues. That is happening so much, and so many of these lawmakers retire and become lobbyists and make lots and lots and lots of money, that there are now regulations. As you saw in the article, they were originally only required to wait 1 year before they could become a lobbyist. Now they have to wait 2. There is a lot of controversy surrounding these interest groups and how they get things done, and that's the big problem that we've been talking